They say the art world is cruel, but no one warned me it would be personal. My name is Elise, and I used to believe talent and honesty would be enough. That was before I met Adrian, a man with a golden smile and a blade for a tongue. We met during my first year at the academy, and he said I painted like I was hiding fire behind water. I should have known he was already studying how to douse it. Adrian wasn't just charming. He was calculated. He noticed what people loved about my work and began mimicking it subtly. He called it inspiration, but deep down I felt something rot. When I confronted him, he laughed and said, "No one owns beauty, Elise." But when my professor hung his sketch next to mine in an exhibit, and people couldn't tell who influenced who, I stopped laughing. He always said we were partners, but I was the shadow. While I built, he watched. While I revealed, he copied. There were whispers, of course, peers questioning the similarities, mentors shifting uncomfortably. But Adrian knew how to disarm with compliments and irony. I was the emotional one, the dramatic one, the girl with too many colors and too few friends. Everything changed the day I caught him in my studio. He had a box cutter in his hand. My latest canvas, a piece I had poured my grief into, was slashed diagonally, a red mark tearing across months of work. He looked surprised but not sorry. "It wasn't working," he said. "I was trying to help you see that." That was the moment I realized. He didn't want to shine next to me. He wanted me gone. I didn't cry. Not that night. I locked the door, took photos of the ruined piece, and stayed silent. But something inside me shifted. Not sadness, clarity. He thought he had cut me out of the picture, but I was about to turn that scar into a spotlight. And he was going to learn what happens when you try to erase a woman with something to say. The academy opened an investigation, but it led nowhere. Adrian said I left the studio unlocked. He blamed some jealous freshman and suggested I was paranoid. Professors nodded solemnly but avoided my eyes. No one wanted trouble, especially not from someone as promising as him. It was easier to let my silence become the closing statement. So I spoke through my art. I began painting wounds, literal gashes across portraits, disfigured beauty, elegance distorted by intrusion. Critics called it raw and revolutionary. Adrian called it disturbing. And that was my first real win, because now, for the first time, he couldn't mimic what he didn't understand. He could only watch me bleed brilliance. Months passed. The academy chose 5 seniors for the spring emergence exhibition. I wasn't supposed to make the list, but someone dropped out. I knew Adrian had expected that final slot to be his. When they announced my name, he clapped with a grin that didn't touch his eyes. I didn't return the smile. I just nodded like I'd been waiting. The theme I chose? Damage and display. I filled the gallery with pieces that bore the scars of erasure. My ruined canvas, the one he slashed, was now framed in gold, its tier lined with thread made of copper. I called it the cut that made me. Each painting was a scream, a testimony, a mirror he couldn't look into. But the centerpiece? That was where I named names. The final piece bore no color, just white and black text, typed like a legal document. This collection was born the night Adrian Vale broke into my studio. When the crowd read it, silence fell like paint on marble. Adrian left early. I stayed late, accepting hands, hearing stories from others who had been dimmed so someone else could shine. That night, I stopped being afraid of my shadow. After the exhibit, people began seeing me. Not just my work, me. My inbox overflowed with messages from students, curators, even strangers. You gave me words I couldn't say. I've lived this story too. I didn't expect applause. I had prepared for silence, but what I got was a quiet army rising from the cracks, holding their own broken frames. Adrian didn't return to class for a week. When he did, his energy was different. Gone was the peacock strut, replaced with clipped tones and eyes that wouldn't meet mine. He tried to talk to me once, catching me outside the print lab. "You went too far," he muttered. "You didn't have to use my name." I replied, "You didn't have to use my hands," and walked away. Rumors spread fast, but this time they stuck. Students whispered about the exhibition piece. A visiting artist even posted a photo of it, calling it the bravest moment in student history. The academy had no choice but to respond, but instead of punishing me, they praised the exhibit's bold commentary on artistic exploitation. Funny how truth becomes valuable once it draws a crowd. He started spiraling. I watched him push, himself harder, longer nights in the studio, more aggressive work. But his art had changed. It was haunted, unfocused. He tried to mimic vulnerability, but had none to show. His recent project, a piece titled "Reflection Burned," was met with polite applause and quiet confusion. He was unraveling, trying to chase a fire he once tried to smother. For a while I felt guilty. Isn't that wild? I asked myself if I had gone too far. But the guilt didn't come from cruelty. It came from conditioning, the belief that I must be too much for finally being seen. I carried that weight for years, but I'm done carrying guilt that doesn't belong to me. Adrian made his choices. I just stopped hiding mine. When graduation came, they handed me an award I didn't expect. The Vanguard Distinction for Social Impact in the Arts. I stood on the stage, the room clapping, and I could feel his absence before I saw it. Adrian didn't attend the ceremony. But I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking about the girl I used to be, clutching her ruined canvas, thinking her voice had been sliced in two. That summer, I was invited to display my collection at a gallery downtown. It wasn't grand, but it was real. A space of my own. I added 2 new pieces, one depicting a storm painted only in hands reaching through it, and another titled Legacy of Silence, featuring blank canvases nailed shut. People wept, some just stared. Pain, it turns out, is a universal dialect. Reporters came. Stories spread. One article featured the title of my exhibit, The Gallery of Cruelty. When asked about the name, I simply said, "It's not just mine." That phrase echoed. The gallery requested a permanent installation. Universities reached out for lectures. I became something I never planned to be. Proof that art can't be killed by envy, only refined by fire. Adrian messaged me once more. This time, no anger, just a sentence. Was it worth it? I didn't reply. Because the truth is, the answer doesn't matter to him. It matters to the girls who walk into that gallery, see their own scars framed, and finally feel like they were never crazy. For them, it wasn't just worth it. It was necessary. People often ask if I've forgiven him. I usually smile and say, I've forgiven myself for letting him shrink me. That's the part no one tells you. Sometimes healing means refusing, to pretend it never happened. My canvas was torn, but it wasn't destroyed. He gave me the wound, but I chose what to do with the scar. And that made all the difference. The gallery became a quiet revolution. Women came in silence, left in tears. Some left notes at the door. One read, "I gave up painting because of a professor who said I was only good when I was sad." Another wrote, "You painted my memory without knowing me." I kept them all. These weren't fan letters. They were confessions, echoes of the wound I once thought was mine alone. I began to understand something deep. Art doesn't just reflect the world. It exposes the parts we're told to keep hidden. My paintings were never just images. They were reclamations. Every smear, every crack, Every empty space had a purpose. The imperfections became the message. I was no longer painting beauty. I was painting survival. Then came the invitation that changed everything. A prestigious European collective requested my full exhibit for a 2-month tour. I hesitated. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I was still afraid he'd find a way to follow. I had spent so long reacting to his shadows, I forgot I could move in the light. I signed the contract the next day. Before I left, I returned to the academy one last time. The room where my canvas had been slashed was being renovated. A professor walked by and smiled awkwardly. "You turned tragedy into triumph," he said, as if that erased the silence they all kept. I nodded but didn't respond. I wasn't there for their praise. I had come to say goodbye to the girl who once asked for permission. Walking out of that building, I felt lighter. Not healed, but freer. There's a difference. Healing implies the wound closes. But some wounds must remain open, if only to remind us who tried to stitch us shut without asking. My work was never about revenge. It was about clarity. And clarity is its own form of justice. Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam. My name began to appear in places I'd only dreamed of. Not because I chased fame, but because I told a truth others were too afraid to hang on walls. Each city left a mark on me. Each gallery felt like a whispered apology to every girl who was told her pain was too loud, her voice too sharp, her brush too bold. One night, after a panel in Vienna, a young man approached me. He held a notebook filled with sketches. "Your story saved me," he said. "I'm not a woman, but I know what it's like to be erased." I hugged him. Because the wound isn't gendered, it's human. And cruelty wears many masks. But truth always shows its face eventually. Months passed. The media tried to paint me as a symbol. The girl who fought back. The artist. Who named her abuser. But I rejected all titles. I wasn't a warrior or a martyr. I was just someone who refused to disappear. That's all. And maybe that's what scared them most. That I stayed visible. That I painted louder. Adrian faded. Word spread that he dropped out of a graduate program. Some said he moved abroad. Others said he stopped painting altogether. I never searched for him. He had stolen too many pages from my story already. I had no interest in giving him the final chapter. My silence now wasn't fear, it was choice. Years later, a professor from the academy emailed me. "We now teach a course inspired by your exhibit," it read. "It's called Art and Erasure." I closed the laptop and laughed, not out of bitterness, but irony. The institution that once let silence thrive was now teaching its consequences. Maybe that's how change happens. Quietly, then all at once. There was one final piece I hadn't finished. I had started it years ago, before the cut, before the fire. It was meant to be soft. Pastel skies, dancing silhouettes. A dream. But every time I tried to return to it, my hands froze. Not because I didn't know how to finish, but because I didn't know who I was when I began. That girl was gone. One evening in Florence, I stood before the unfinished canvas. I didn't plan. I didn't sketch. I just painted. Not rage this time, grace. I painted the scar as a bridge, not a wound. I blended the slash into a path, turning what was broken into a beginning. I called it the piece he couldn't touch. And when I stepped back, I saw me again. Not who I had been, but who I had become. The opening night of the new exhibit was packed. Critics whispered, journalists scribbled, strangers stared. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the woman in the second row. She looked just like I had, years ago. Uncertain, trembling, wide-eyed. When she saw that final piece, she gasped. And I knew. She saw a version of herself healing. Later that night, she found me. "Thank you," she whispered. I was going. To quit. I held her hand and said, Don't quit. Paint the pain. Show them what it looks like when someone survives. And she cried, not loudly, just enough to wash away the dust of being ignored. I didn't need applause. I needed that moment. And it came. When I returned to my apartment, I placed a sticky note on my mirror. It read, You were never fragile. They just wanted you to think you were. That became my mantra, my defense, my freedom, because fragility wasn't my flaw, it was their excuse. And now I had shattered it with color, canvas, and clarity. As the years passed, my name became less about survival and more about transformation. I was invited to teach, to mentor, to speak. Not about Adrian, but about systems, about silence, about how power hides in flattery, and how talent is often punished when it refuses to kneel. I told them, protect your fire, even when they call it too much. I returned to the academy one final time to deliver a lecture. The auditorium was filled with new faces, eager eyes. I stood at the podium, heart steady. Art isn't what you make, I began. It's what they try to erase. I watched the students lean forward, and I knew. This was no longer about me. This was legacy work, lineage, a ripple against forgetting. That night, I left a small envelope taped to the studio door where my canvas was once destroyed. Inside was a single photo, the slashed painting, now repaired and framed. On the back I wrote, I don't need revenge. I have memory. I walked away before anyone could find it. Some truths don't need an audience. They just need to exist. In time, people stopped asking about Adrian. His name faded like pencil on wet paper, but my exhibit remained. The Gallery of Cruelty became a traveling archive of stories. Others began submitting their own pieces, their own scars. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about all of us. The erased, the dismissed, the unfinished masterpieces. And so I painted one last canvas, a mirror, empty but reflective, titled What They Never Expected. It now hangs at the end of the exhibition hall, facing the exit. A silent reminder that the final image is yours, that you decide what survives, that even after the ruin, even after the theft, something beautiful still stands. Years later, I no longer painted from pain, but I never stopped painting from truth. My studio was quiet, filled with light. I began experimenting with softness again, clouds, hands touching, the way light spills through curtains at dawn. But even in peace, there were always echoes. Not ghosts, but reminders. I never painted to forget. I painted to carry. I was invited to curate a new collection. Women Who Remained. Artists from around the world submitted works rooted in betrayal, in silence, in resilience. I saw myself in their stories. And yet, I wasn't the center anymore. That was the true gift. I had become part of a chorus, no longer a solo, but a symphony of defiance. One piece stood out, a sculpture of a woman sewing her own heart shut, gold thread between her fingers. I contacted the artist, a teenager from Brazil, and asked her to speak at the exhibit. She said, "Your gallery gave me courage." And I told her, "Now yours will give it to someone else." That's what art does. It multiplies the moment it's shared. I had once believed my name would always be tied to Adrian, but now it was tied to hundreds, thousands, to people who painted through fear, who reclaimed their voice in brushstrokes, who were never meant to survive, yet thrived. I didn't erase the past. I reframed it, hung it in the center of the room, and built a future around it. Some nights I still dream of that first canvas, the one he destroyed. But in the dream, I'm not crying. I'm painting it again, calmly, confidently, this time with him watching. But he doesn't speak. He only stares, because in the end, he didn't silence me. He made me louder. And he'll have to live with that forever. The final chapter was never about revenge. It was about ownership, about reclaiming the parts of myself I once gave away too easily, in fear, in hope, in love. Now I give on my own terms. My art is no longer an open wound. It's an invitation. Come see what remains when the fire doesn't win. People still ask me why I named the exhibit the Gallery of Cruelty. I smile and say, because it started with cruelty, but it didn't end there. It ended with creation, with survival, with truth, with a girl who refused to fade, and a woman who learned how to blaze. And every piece on the wall is a witness to that. I no longer need to speak his name. The silence around it is louder than sound. He is the absence between brushstrokes, the space where something could have been, but wasn't. And that's all he deserves. My story was never about him. It was about what I became after him. That's the part he'll never reach. Sometimes, I walk through the gallery at closing time, lights dimmed, halls empty. I touch each frame lightly as I pass. Each canvas is a memory, a lesson, a wound rewritten. I stop at the last piece, the mirror, and catch my reflection. I smile, because I'm still here, still visible, still unbroken, and as I leave, I whisper one final truth into the air. You can destroy my canvas, but never the hand that painted it. And with that, the gallery sleeps, but my voice doesn't. It echoes in every corner, every stroke, every breath between colors. I was never erased. I was reborn.